Alex Camberis presents.
Everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We'll be discussing CCWIS data quality plans, lessons learned 2 years later. So we're scheduled to go from 1:30 to 3 o'clock Eastern. Thank you again for everyone who's joining us today. Next slide, please. Just a reminder that participating in today's webinar, you're able to submit questions and comments via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen or later during the presentation over the phone. You're also welcome after the webinar to email any questions you have to your federal analysts or to the email on your screen, and we'll post that email again at the end of this presentation. Okay, thank you. Today's speakers, we have Teresa Young. Back one slide, please. Today's speakers, we have Teresa Young, Program Management Analyst from the Division of State Systems, and myself, Alex Camberis, a Technical Assistance Contractor assigned to the Division of State Systems. Thank you. Next slide. All right, here's an agenda of the topics we'll be covering today. There's a range of information and a follow-up from previous webinars we've done on this subject. At the end, we'll mention how you can find that previous webinar along with technical bulletin number 6 that we released and is available on our website. So we'll be covering several topics, including some lessons learned and findings from the past 2 years, and we'll do a deep dive into preparing for biennial reviews, among other things on the agenda. We will save time at the end for any questions you may have and some final thoughts. Next slide, please. We're going to take a brief poll just to get a sense of the audience. The question is, what is your comfort level with data quality concepts? Rush, would you throw up the poll on the screen, please? All right, would everyone take a few seconds here to look this over and choose the one most appropriate for you? And we'll give people a couple seconds and then we'll close it out. All right, Rush, what does the poll say? All right, well, broad range. We do have people that are familiar with it, as well as some people that are relatively newer to the concept. So this is good information to have. In fact, this mirrors some of the polls we've taken on recent webinars, where we have quite a few new folk mixed with some of the people that have been doing this for a while. So good to see. Thank you all. We'll do one more poll at the end for another topic. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. I'll turn this over to Teresa Young, my colleague.
Thanks, Alex. Hello, everyone. So we wanted to just start off the webinar by having a high-level overview of the CCWIS data quality regulations, and also just talk about why data quality is important. Next slide, please. So most of you are already familiar with CCWIS data quality regulations, but we've referenced the requirements here for your convenience. We think it's important, to remember why data quality requirements were included in the regulation in the first place. We have important lessons learned over the years from implementing CCWIS systems. And we really want to make sure that the technology that we build supports program improvement and provides good data. One important part of the regulation that I wanted to draw your attention to is down at the bottom of the screen on D5, and that is the requirement to complete an annual update. And we wanted to make sure that folks know that the requirement to do an annual update isn't just a requirement to do a repetitive summary, kind of the data quality plan itself. But it really is a requirement to report on the status of progress of each part of the regulation. So where is your agency, at? How are you doing? And, do revisions need to be made? And we talked before in other technical assistance webinars. We want to make sure that folks know that the data quality plan really should be a living document. It's not just a paper document or electronic document for us, for Children's Bureau. It really is a plan to help you, make sure that the system is meeting the objectives that you've set for your system. Next slide, please. So most of you already know why data quality is important. We've noted a few reasons it matters here, but we also wanted to emphasize your role in modeling why data quality is important in your agency, and why, again, making sure that data quality is considered when systems are being built is so important. Next slide, please. Again, here we're talking about, what are the consequences of poor data quality? And child welfare is, not unlike any other industry, where more and more, we see the implications of poor data quality. But ultimately in our world, not being able to provide responsive services or not being able to have good information to make decisions on that affect children's lives, really puts the onus on us to really emphasize data quality, maybe more so than other industries. And some of this probably looks familiar to you. Some of these screens were in a prior webinar, but we just wanted to pull them up and draw your attention to them again. Next slide, please. Okay, so this should also look familiar to you. It is in Technical Bulletin 6, which is the data quality technical bulletin at this point. And these were the items or the areas that, a good data quality plan should have. And most of you, for the most part, have followed this outline in most of the plans that we've seen. But we wanted to make sure that that these are recommendations, and that, depending on where your state is, both in the development of your system or the maturity of your data quality efforts, some data quality plans may focus more on data governance, and roles and responsibilities, while, your next update, you may focus more on a particular area, whether it's involving stakeholders or doing data profiling. So we wanted to make sure that states know that you have some flexibility here to prioritize these areas based on what makes sense for your project and where your state is in terms of the priority and what you think is important. Next slide, please. So for the next couple of slides, what we're going to talk about is, now that the transition is more than 2 years old, it's hard to believe that, for CCWIS, we wanted to talk about, what are we seeing and what are the lessons learned for data quality and data quality plans. And I just wanted also to point out that, we say this to you often, but it's really true in this instance, that we are learning together, that it's 2 years of the states, beginning to implement CCWIS data quality plans. It's 2 years, of federal staff really trying to work through the regulation and operationalize, what the regulation means. So when we look at these lessons learned, we do have areas of findings and areas of innovation. But I want to challenge us as we're looking at the findings, you know, to think about how we can do things differently and how we can improve in those areas, but not necessarily to see this as, you know, negative feedback to all of us. I mean, I really think it is just sort of a synopsis of where do we see improvements, you know, that need to be made. Next slide, please. So one of the findings that we see has to do really with the maturity of data governance. And, you know, again, agencies have been all over the map with this, some having, you know, no real data governance structure or very informal data governance structure, and others having, you know, a more structured approach in their organization. But what we really are looking for is, you know, some level of structure around governance, and that your plan, you know, identifies, you know, leadership buy-in and modeling, and also, you know, in terms of responsibilities, a more than just a racy matrix, you know, that is pretty high level, but it really isn't clear kind of what the steps are and who has responsibility for making sure that the plan is being implemented. And, you know, the other part of governance is communication and making sure that the data quality priorities and progress in plans and the effectiveness of those plans are being communicated throughout the agency, as well as to, you know, your important stakeholders. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so one of the other findings that we wanted to talk about today has to do with a topic that we talk to you about often, and that is, you know, making sure that the data quality plan isn't sort of a requirement that is being fulfilled in a vacuum, you know, in the CCWIS project, but really that it is part of a collaboration, you know, between the program area, and also that it is integrated, you know, with other similar or related efforts, you know, within your organization. You know, we want to make sure that if data quality issues are being identified through your CFSR process or your PIP, or in some of your ongoing issues with federal reports, that, you know, that there's integration and that there is a relationship and understanding, you know, of the issues that are impacting performance in those other reports, but that those are prioritized and being worked on in a collaborative way with your data quality plans. Okay, next slide, please. So we touched on this one when I talked about the regulation, and this is kind of the sparse updates. And it has been, you know, somewhat concerning to us. You know, it was hard, I guess I would say, for that first round of data quality plans to get them in place. But the updates that we're seeing really don't, you know, don't have very much detail or changes at all, you know, from the original data quality plan that was submitted. So we really do expect to see, you know, you reporting on the status and the progress, what's working well, what's not working well, what needs to be changed in your updates. The next area, I think we've probably talked, probably almost to all states, you know, who've submitted data quality plans. So this is an area, you know, that we probably all, you know, need to work on. And part of our thinking today is, you know, also an opportunity for you to give us feedback on where, you know, the focus of technical assistance can be helpful to you. So thinking about that and looking at this one, you know, I'm wondering, you know, is, you know, writing good data quality standards that are measurable, you know, seems to be an issue. And I don't know if that's because that's just hard to do, or there's a fear, you know, if I commit myself or commit my agency, to this standard and we don't meet it, that's going to be, reflect negatively on the agency. Or, if the lack of standards has to do, with the teams, that work on data quality being separated from the project team. So I'm not really sure, what is behind the problems with this finding. But, if we really don't have articulated standards for completeness, timeliness, and accuracy, it makes the whole notion in some ways of doing a data quality plan itself somewhat meaningless. So I think we really do need to improve here and commit ourselves, and again, you have flexibility on what you focus on. So, we're not saying, you need to do this specific standard. You can look in your system. You all have a good understanding, I think, of where the pain points are, where the data quality issues are. And you have a good understanding, I think, of where the focus should be. So we are asking agencies to commit to actual standards and, to be in a position really where you can report on whether or not the initiatives and the automation that you have, to measure and monitor those standards is effective. Next slide, please. Oh, and I forgot something on the issue of standards that was at the end of that remedy. If you are in a position where you don't have you don't have a standard, and you're still at, you're not happy, maybe you're there, but that's where you are, that you don't have a standard. Okay, we're trying to be flexible, but we need to see reasonable timeframes for when you're going to get there. And particularly if we're 2 years into this, we really still shouldn't see plans that say, don't have timeframes or steps, to really get there. So if you are sending us one and you don't have standards, you should have a reasonable time frame in your plan for when you will commit to those standards. Next slide, please. Okay, so we really wanted to have this webinar because we are moving into the time period where the biennial reviews findings are due. And so, what are it's early on, so it's good timing for us. And we wanted to spend time today talking about what do we expect to see, in the biennial reviews. So one of the findings so far, it's early, but again, we're not seeing, baseline data and reporting out on performance or how states are doing, on the plans that they set and whether or not they are effective or not. So again, the biennial review should really be helpful to you as setting priorities and giving a report out on what you've been able to achieve, both in the system and as part of your, work with users and stakeholders to improve data quality. This last finding also is a challenge, I think, for all of us who work on these systems, and that is, we get sometimes in a rut with what we have. And it's very hard when you have so many priorities, and I don't underestimate at all the level of priorities that you have. But at the same time, we still have to challenge ourselves to always be looking, are we automating everything that we could, to make sure that our data is as strong as it can be and is as usable as it can be. And sometimes, we'll bring this up in reviews or technical assistance when we're talking with agencies. And the agency's just acclimated to a very labor-intensive manual process. And I understand some of you have very limited technology that is old, and so some of you have constraints, in terms of what you can automate. But in terms of priority or making sure that the new system that are being built, this is an area, that is as important, or more important than any other area, because we really need to, if again, if the system isn't producing data that we can use or data that we can rely on, what is the point of building the system? So I think we really need to push ourselves around here, to be looking constantly at whether or not we have manual processes that can be automated to improve, completeness, timeliness, or accuracy. Next slide, please. This next finding, again, this is a learning area for all of us, which is duplication. And, obviously in the preamble, and there's some descriptions around what duplication is. We don't expect to see, the same data elements being entered repeatedly, by users, or, modules that have the same data elements being collected that are not consistent. But what we're seeing, at least in the early data quality plans, is there's really very little emphasis on how the agency's controlling for duplication at all. So this is something that we really need to be more thoughtful about. And if you do have methods that you are using or standards that you have, make sure they're included, in your data quality plan. Because right now, we're not seeing very much of a focus on that. The next finding has to do with lack of real-time data. Again, we recognize that some of you have constraints, based on the technology you're using. But whenever possible, and particularly with new systems, we really should be striving for having real-time data access for users. And if real-time data access isn't available for data reports, then very near time, a couple hours, an hour, 24 hours, should be the norm. Again, we need up-to-date data to help users have good information when they're making decisions or understanding, where they are themselves, and also where the agency is in dealing with a particular issue. Next slide, please. This next finding, really, this is probably, most of you who've been around for a while know this is a pain point with CCWIS systems. But it's also something that even in the newer systems that we often hear when we do interviews with stakeholders. And that is, even if you can get the users sort of focused on data quality problems, they don't know what to do to fix them, or if they know what to do, the process for being able to fix them is overwhelming. It takes too long. They might have to call the help desk or, work through a lot of historical data and records, to try to get something fixed. So, again, if you have an older system and you have constraints, on what you can do to address this, that's somewhat understandable. But if you're building a new system, and you really should have requirements, that relate to ease of use for correcting errors. We really don't want to repeat, some of the lessons that were learned from CCWIS systems where users can't easily, modify their data. Of course, having things be tracked, when changes are made. But it should be pretty easy, for a user to know that something is not correct or is entered improperly, and to make, be able to change that data or know what they need to do, to fix data in the system. So the next finding we talked about, and in terms of the remedy, we're looking for policies and procedures, around how you expect data quality to be corrected, even if you can't deal with it from a technology standpoint in terms of the automation in your system. Trainings and communication, to users about how you make corrections should just be standard. We really shouldn't see or talk to users and they have no idea, what they need to do in order to correct data problems. We talked a little bit about the level of automation. And again, CWIS offers the opportunity to have more data exchanges than we had in the past. So we should be seeing, your exchange standard for those exchanges that it applies to. And in your documentation, your system documentation, your data quality standards for exchanges should be documented. So we should be seeing, data dictionaries and your defined exchange protocols and, formal data sharing agreements and protocols for how information is shared between systems. Next slide, please. So this next one, we really need your help with. We haven't seen in some ways deliverables in very many proposals or in contracts that really clearly spell out what the vendor's responsibility is as it relates to data quality automation in CWIS systems, or even in if you have vendor helping you with your data quality plan, what their responsibilities are. Sometimes we see vendor data quality plans, not to pick on them, but it's pretty clear sometimes when we get the plan that it's totally divorced from the program, from the state's responsibility, where it'll just say things like, the vendor's going to do one or two things, and 90% basically of the regulation is the state's responsibility, but there's nothing, nothing really addressing kind of what the state's responsibility is. So it's fine to have a vendor help, but we really need to see, good coordination and collaboration between the vendor's role and the state's role. And really, we should be seeing more language around deliverables and expectations for data quality in the new system integrator contracts or in, the proposals. And again, just thinking out loud about where technical assistance could be helpful. We don't know for sure always that we understand what would be most helpful to you. So any kind of feedback you want to give us on the Q&As or later, you can always do that. But this may be another area since we're really not seeing this very much. Do we need to provide more technical assistance on what those deliverables might look like? It's just a question, something to think about. Or is there something else, on some of these findings that we've discussed that you think would be more helpful? Okay, next slide, please. So we've talked about, some of the findings, the areas, the pain points where we're growing and areas where we need to build capacity. But we also, wanted to spend a little time talking about where we are seeing innovations. And we are seeing innovations, and probably you're doing innovations that we don't know about. So again, these webinars are more interesting when you all share, what you're doing with one another and with us. So if you have an innovation or something that you're doing that you think, might be of benefit to another state, please feel free to speak up and share them with us. One of the most basic things that sounds really novel, but it's not easy to do, and it really is an innovation that we've seen, are the different methods that the states are using to communicate data quality priorities and progress and plans, regularly to users and to stakeholders. Some agencies have implemented specific websites, that relate to data quality. Some agencies have the ability to publish, data quality information directly in the system when a certain priority is being emphasized. Some agencies have, a variety of dashboards, whether they're external or internal. Some agencies are really focusing on data quality at an enterprise level, which is helpful and sometimes can help you leverage resources and take a broader approach than just the CWIS system. There's some other ones on here. Again, the focus throughout the year, I think, is also, whether it's scheduling training, presentations, meetings, and you have a specific plan that you're implementing for the year, of what those initiatives are around data quality. And you're making a lot of effort to actually involve users and supervisors in understanding data and using data. All of that, is valuable and is innovative. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, thanks. So some of you are using third-party software tools that are new, that have come on the market. I know some of them are not totally implemented to the level that you would like them to be, but we do see agencies doing quite a bit of research, on what software tools are out there that didn't exist, when CCWIS systems were built. And, even if you haven't been able to use that third-party tool totally with your system, we do see some states really profiling their data. So whether it's, trying to control duplicates or matching data, other states have done a good job of profiling the confidentiality, around certain data elements, whether that's, certain policies or security or confidentiality requirements around personally identifying information or adoption information, or reporter information in the intake module. So, it is very important, to have a process really for profiling both, kind of the results of your data, but also, the standards and the requirements that are in your system for different types of data. The most important innovation probably really is, again, just using the data from the system. So, when we see states that really are heavily dependent on their system data for developing policies or making funding decisions, or states that understand the federal standards are standards, and they've invested, or they have set higher standards or have more standards that focus on day-to-day, operational needs. Again, those are innovations that we appreciate and that we do see. There's more on here around data sharing agreements. And, again, this one is really important too, which is, how strong are your testing scenarios and your testing scripts for making sure that, the system that you're implementing is going to be able to produce the reports that you need, and the pain points, that you experienced in your legacy system, how, the project is making sure that those are being addressed when the new modules, are being developed. So we are seeing, some efforts in states to do that, where they have really a good gap analysis, of their legacy system, and where they have specific strategies in their new system to make sure that those data quality issues are not replicated or repeated. Okay, so at this point, I am going to turn the webinar over to Alex, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about a strong data quality plan and the biennial reviews.
Hey, Teresa, this is Jordan Panning. Sorry to jump in here. We have been getting a lot of really great questions.
Okay.
So should we take a moment now to answer some of these before moving into Alex's segment?
Questions and answers session begins here.
Sure. I just want to make sure I give Alex time, so maybe we can get started on a few of them maybe, and then kind of regroup where we are at the end. I just want to make sure he has adequate time to do his part of the presentation.
Sure thing. First one here. Who's the target audience of the data quality plan? Is it only for ACF for reporting purposes, or for the agency staff as well as the guidance document / roadmap?
Yeah, I would say, it is not a plan for ACF. It is a requirement, obviously, for ACF. plan that is of value, to your organization and the priorities, that your organization has. And, the thought behind it really is to make sure that technology is supporting those priorities, that there's integration in the system development for the data quality issues and priorities that are important to the organization.
Okay. The next one. What do you see as the difference between data governance and data stewardship?
I think data governance is broader than data stewardship. Data governance is the focus, on how data is managed across the organization or across multiple stakeholders, and it's the overarching umbrella of your program. Where data stewardship, I think, is usually a step down from data governance, and it has more to do with like who are your champions and what are the roles, of particular users. For stewarding good data, making sure that data that is available in the system is at the level, that you want it to be. So I guess I would say data stewardship is more about the doers, if you will, of implementing your data quality plan, where data governance is kind of the umbrella where all your data quality initiatives kind of fall.
Okay, the next one here.
Alex, I don't know if you want to add anything. I mean, I don't have to answer, these by myself. So if there is something you'd like to add or say, please feel free to chime in.
I think that was a fabulous answer.
Our next question here is, since data quality is listed as one of the topics to be covered in the data quality plan, besides data governance and other areas, will it be less confusing to name the plan as a data plan or data strategy plan instead of a data quality plan?
That's an interesting suggestion. And, I think the agency's free to name their plan whatever they want to name it, but for us, in terms of the regulation, if you're submitting that plan to meet that aspect of the regulation, we're more concerned about the content, and whether or not the whatever you're sending in, whatever you name it, is addressing, the priorities of and the requirements that are in the regulation. But if you want to call it something else, maybe that is a more appropriate name, so I think that's a good suggestion. And if an organization wants to do that, I don't think we would have a problem with that.
Next question here. The draft TB number 7 mentioned about providing self-assessment tools for data quality and data exchange standards. What is the estimated timeline to release these self-assessment tools?
Good question. Where we are right now with the self-assessment tools is, as most of you know, 6 of them were published and went through the 60-day review process. We have at least done an initial draft of revisions to those first 6 that were published based on the state feedback, which we greatly appreciate. And we are in the process of republishing the first 6 for 30 days. Right now, those first 6 are going through policy review. We're pretty far along with that. So you should see those published pretty soon. That said, we are in the middle of an administrative change, as all of you know. And so sometimes when that happens, new players and new processes, come into effect. So I can't say, specifically when these things will be done. The next batch, we have to wait till the 30-day period for the first 6 is done before we can publish the next group of tools. So the data quality tool itself is in the next grouping of tools. So it's probably going to be a few months. But I will also say, we've been sharing these drafts with states who've been helping us develop them. And so, if you want to see one, or it hasn't been shared with you, or you want to give more feedback, even on the draft, even before it's published, in the PRA announcement, we're open to that and we appreciate it. So if you haven't received it and you want to look at it, just let us know.
Alex Cambaris presents.
I'll jump in and start my section. There are a few more good questions, but in the sake of time, to make sure we fit in the presentation, we'll move on and then handle the rest of these questions at the end. One of them that I do have seen a couple times is whether or not this will be made available. And yes, this PowerPoint will be made available after the presentation, and it is being recorded. And once it goes through a 508 compliance process, it will be on our website. All right. So let's go to the next slide, please. All right. So I'm going to focus on some key components. And as our office reviewed data quality plans over the last 2 years, we observed that plans strong in the 5 areas you see on the screen are highly indicative of an agency that has dedicated resources to data quality efforts. While these are not the only factors that determine a comprehensive data quality plan, they are certainly critical components that demonstrate to the Children's Bureau an agency has given time and resources to ensure or tried to ensure the CCWIS supports data quality efforts. Before we dive into each component, let's discuss some definitions to help us explain what the Children's Bureau is looking for. Next slide, please. So, for several of the following slides, we'll be looking at aspects of the 5 key components I shared on the previous slide. And we'll be using some operational definitions to help even the playing field make sure everyone understands what we're talking about in 3 categories: optimal, developmental, and unacceptable. This is to illustrate what sets apart plans that optimally address data quality with those plans that are developmental or unacceptable. You may be familiar with this concept. Many states have done practice models using a similar model, so hopefully this concept of these 3 categories is familiar. We recognize, and Teresa mentioned earlier, that many states or agencies are building capacity and are seeking to improve data quality efforts. We frequently provide technical assistance on our regular monthly calls, and our goal is to help states move from the developmental to an optimal one. And please contact your federal analyst if you have questions or would like additional technical assistance regarding data quality plans. So we will now address the 5 key components one by one and discuss some optimal practices agencies should consider when drafting their plans. Next slide, please. So the first key area is governance, and we talked a little bit about that earlier, and Teresa mentioned that in one of her answers to a question. But data quality plans should clearly identify the data owners and stewards and the people or positions responsible for the CCWIS data governance. But this goes beyond just listing roles and responsibilities or inserting a RACI chart of who has what duties and who's accountable for what. We're also looking for evidence that the agency leadership is involved and resources have been dedicated to data governance efforts. And assigning data quality to an individual or a project team is not sufficient. While they may be tasked to write the plan, it is important to demonstrate a shared vision with program ownership and collaboration between the program and technical teams. Next slide, please. All right. Here's some optimal practices agencies should consider when drafting the data quality plans in the area of governance. I won't read them to you, but I will review the 3rd example. As Teresa noted earlier this afternoon, it is an area we think that can be strengthened in many plans. So in the column labeled optimal at the very bottom, we're looking for clear evidence of cooperation and coordination between the program and project teams. An optimal data quality plan would highlight that, address it, acknowledge the different roles, whereas a developmental plan might provide only limited evidence, briefly mention it. The acknowledgement is good, but we're looking for more depth to the response. And then finally, an unacceptable plan would either provide no evidence or no indication there was coordination between program and project teams. Next slide, please. The next focus area are on setting data quality priorities. Plans should identify the key participants and processes for how the agency has determined their data quality priorities. These priorities can result from a gap analysis of the legacy system, for an example, user feedback, audit review findings, or even as a response to changes in practice, policy, and law. For example, an agency may have determined that one of their priorities is to improve the completeness of progress notes because it's an area of concern noted in an internal QA process. The data quality plan should list the specific milestones the agency is taking to achieve these priorities with the specific staff involved. Typically, these would be program staff, an example I use, since they are the data owners. While some priorities may result from biennial reviews, as I mentioned, the reason for these priorities can come from a wide variety of areas. Next slide, please. All right. So again, here are a few examples of optimal practice when it comes to submitting data quality plans. For example, I'm going to focus on the third bullet again. Data quality priorities from the last year plan are addressed, including any progress made towards resolution. We are looking for ongoing efforts over time for these areas. So reporting them in 1 year as being underway, we would expect the following year to address how it was resolved, if there is continuing work that needs to be done, what automations perhaps have been put in place to address them, so on and so forth. Next slide, please. And I know I'm going through these slides and not talking about every example. I won't read them all to you, but they will be available again on the PowerPoint that will be shared after this presentation. So here are just a few more data quality priorities. And we'll talk a lot more about involving stakeholders and vendors in a few slides from now. But when setting priorities, we're looking for evidence that it is reflective of stakeholder needs, or at least that they have been involved in coming up with these agency priorities. And likewise, looking for if vendor involvement or deliverables or contract language or acknowledgement that vendors have a role to play in meeting these data quality priorities if vendors are used. Next slide, please. The third key component we will discuss today is user engagement. Agencies should identify, engage the individuals, groups, and organizations impacted by the outcome or ones that have an interest in the success of the CCWIS. To what extent are they involved in the CCWIS project? In addition to the questions you see on the slide, what are feedback mechanisms to keep them informed, and by them I mean users, and assess the effectiveness of data quality strategies? How are users involved in data governance activities or decision making? Perhaps importantly, how are their pain points addressed and prioritized? Next slide, please. So as the one example, I'll look at the first bullet under the optimal column. We're looking for evidence of an established and clearly identified process for soliciting, prioritizing, and acting upon end-user input. Ultimately, there will need to be a governance team that weighs priorities and makes decisions about cost, benefit, and so on. But we're looking for evidence that in that feedback loop and in that decision-making, that stakeholders' needs are clearly identified and considered, and that it supports the idea that user input is fundamental to the success of a project, and data quality plans should address how agencies engage with the users as part of their documentation. This supports a lot of the findings after our site visits, after we've interviewed users, where there are system-wide pain points that have been perhaps known for years, and there are plans to address, but other priorities come up and get in the way. And so what we look for is documentation of what decisions were made, how they were made, and how they ultimately will support data quality efforts. Next slide, please. The fourth critical area are data quality standards, and Teresa mentioned a few of these earlier, and I believe we have one or two questions in the Q&A box that we'll get to in a little bit about standards. But it is important for agencies to think beyond federal data reports when developing standards. Yes, AFGARS has a data standard, but that's the bare minimum. States and tribes perhaps have other standards they could use or already have. Regulations that describe CCWIS require agencies to review their own policies and data reporting needs as part of this process. Some examples that we've seen of state or tribal requirements in this area are expectations for timely entry into the CCWIS. You know, is it within 48 business hours? Is it within a week? What is the standard? Supervisory requirements for case reviews, process for addressing blank data fields from programs that aren't required by federal law but are state or tribal specific, perhaps a specific assessment tool used by the 4E agency. General data standards across the development teams so that built-in data standards can support data quality before the system's even used. And then likewise, training standards and requirements to address data collection and entry requirements, and what the internal QA process requires in terms of number of cases examined over a certain period of time. Next slide, please. All right. Here are a few optimal standards. The first one, in the data quality plan, we're looking to see if an agency has provided a comprehensive list of the data standards they have to meet federal, but also state or tribal needs. These standards can be documented in the plan itself. Links can be provided, attachments can be submitted. We're not looking for people to create work, but rather reflect the work that is being done. However, if there are no standards, we are looking for evidence that work is being done to develop those standards. All right, next slide, please. All right, I'm going to pause here before we talk about the fifth key component, which is biennial reviews. We have quite a few slides about that, but I want to make sure, Jordan and Teresa, if we had any questions pop up that we should address at this interval.
Questions and answers session begins here.
We do have a number of questions to go through. I can state some of those now if you want to go over them.
Why don't we take two and then we'll resume?
Okay, we'll do two. The first one here, is there a reason why states can't mirror the accuracy and timeliness standards articulated in AFGARS and NIDED regulations?
So I will answer that. You know, the agency can use the federal standards for, you know, where they exist for the existing federal reports if the agency chooses to do that. And some agencies we've seen that, you know, we've accepted that. But I do think, you know, if we're talking about just the continuum of doing really strong data quality, you know, the federal standards should be minimal. You know, AFGARS reports are 6 months old, you know, and users, you know, need information, I think, about data quality issues, you know, day to day, you know, and they need to know how they're doing and what they can do, you know, to change practice or improve practice, you know, sometimes more frequently than what federal data standards will tell you. But, you know, is it a place to start and can you use them? Yes. You know, do we think it's, you know, better practice and stronger to go beyond them and focus them more on the actual areas that your agency is struggling with or that you found, to be most needed by your users, that would be stronger.
And the next question here, is there a standard definition for frequency that qualifies for live or real time? For example, would API refresh every 5 minutes qualify as real time, or is it near real time?
I don't think we've defined that, and I don't know if industry practice has defined that. But at this point, at least in CWIS, or to my knowledge, for federal regulations that I'm aware of, unless someone else, Alex or somebody else, has a different understanding, but we've not yet.
No, it is not defined by us, but certainly we are looking for near or real time. So I think each state would be different, and we'd have to talk about the specifics of the state, but in general, we have not set a standard for that.
Yeah, I know one agency at least talked with me about, trying to look at whatever the data is and how the users use the data, and trying to make sure that the most, critical data that staff need to do, their work, is available timely, or is available as close to real time as possible, and there could be other stuff that, that you're looking at a longer term. But like Alex said, we want the systems to have as current data, as possible. And if you're building new systems and you're connecting with other systems that have newer technology, the API should be able to give you, real-time data. So we're just trying to set that standard, to the greatest extent that we can, recognizing that, there may be some constraints or limitations that agencies have.
I also imagine if you ask 10 software vendors, you'd get 10 different answers. So I think it comes down to individual needs, and what's important is getting the data as quickly as possible so that poor decisions are not made with inadequate or incomplete data. All right. Thank you, Jordan. And I know there are a few other questions still sitting out there. We have this section on biennial reviews, and then some other slides, and then we'll get back to the rest of the questions. So next slide, please. All right. So we'll spend a few more slides on biennial reviews just because we feel they're so important. These are where data quality plans are operationalized and should reinforce the activities that help the agency focus on data quality priorities important to the child welfare staff, community stakeholders, and agency leadership. As we noted earlier today, we'd like to see biennial review activities throughout the 2-year period, rather than a spurt of activities in the last quarter of the biennial review period. We'd like to see a description of how data and review activities will be used to improve practice. It's important to think about how your agency will assess whether the review activities are working and meeting the goals you've articulated in the plan along the way, rather than waiting until the review period is over to do so. Next slide, please. So, key point here, the 4E agency must document the steps taken to address the biennial review findings in subsequent data quality plans. Identifying the quality issue and the agency priorities are just the first steps, and the CB will be looking for measurable goals with specific timeframes and designated owners. Next slide, please. So, again, here are just a few examples for you when you get a copy of this document to look over and see what we're looking for in an optimal plan. But as one example, I'm going to focus on bullet 3 again, just because that's a theme you may have noticed throughout this presentation, that we're looking for evidence that there's coordination between the program and technology teams to conduct the biennial reviews and address any findings. as Teresa mentioned earlier, we're seeing that if a plan is written by technology staff, it has very little information about integration with the overall agency strategic plan for data quality. Likewise, if it's just the program side writing the plan, there's no discussion of the or limited discussion of the automated functions and the capacity of CWIS to support strong data quality. And we think it's important for those two dialectical sides here to work together. Next slide, please. All right. So on this slide and the next three slides, we will break down some topics in your data quality plan that can go a long ways to addressing all the needs we've discussed in the previous few slides. You may have seen a similar slide on the last webinar, and actually earlier on in this webinar for data quality plans in general. These are not meant to be an exhaustive list. You may have additional topics you feel are fundamental to your biennial reviews, and even depending on the phase of your efforts, some categories carry more weight than others to meet the unique needs of your project or your agency. We really do encourage you to share drafts of your biennial reviews with your federal analysts and discuss your progress and any questions you have before the APD is due. So I'm going to dive into these numbers here on the next couple slides. So next slide, please. So we've added these considerations here and on the next two slides to help you develop your biennial review process. Ideally, activities and data would be available throughout the review period and accessible by program staff to help achieve the desired results. You may wish to think about what level of automated support you currently have and what may be available now or could be in the future. So just want to illustrate that there are a lot of things that go into these biennial reviews, and we encourage you to start as early as possible in your cycle. All right, I'm going to go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So you see automation up there. I mentioned that already. But it's important to think about how to tailor your results to show people care about and help motivate users to enter good data and review results, rather than just focusing on what's missing, highlighting poor data quality, or standards that are only compliance-driven. Messaging these review activity results in a way that highlight accomplishments and the impact of good quality practices can go a long way from getting buy-in from the user community. And that's why it is a critical part of helping stakeholders own the system, is to review it as a supportive tool that aligns with the program values. All right, so next slide, please. Here are a few more considerations we strongly encouraged in your plans. It's okay to acknowledge the challenges, whether they're internal or external. And if a challenge or barrier comes up to achieving your priorities, we'd like to hear about it and understand how you're attempting to resolve these challenges. It may be software issues. It may be a pandemic. It may be a legislature that has created new priorities. So we want to hear that and understand. And as we mentioned earlier, as time goes on, we expect these data quality plans to build on each other, and future plans to close out earlier priorities and needs and come up with new ones as time goes on. Next slide, please. All right, thanks for staying with us so far. Quick time check, it's 2:38. We will now transition to another quick poll, and then we'll dive into some Q&A and a few final thoughts where we'll get to your questions. So Rush, if you cue the poll up ready, the question is, what are the top barriers to data quality efforts at your agency? Rush, you with me? There we go. All right, if everyone would take a minute to fill this out, please choose the top 2 barriers. Give it a couple seconds more. All right, so Rush is going to compile that here. All right. Wow, every category is pretty consistent there. Staffing limitations is the clear winner. So yeah, these take a lot of work. Data quality plans do take work. But one thing we'd like to stress is that when possible, align with existing efforts to improve data quality whenever possible. Also understand that when you submit your APDs and you are requesting money, data quality planning efforts are one category that some agencies have decided to focus on and have been creative in leveraging CCWIS funding to support their data quality needs if it can be shown to support the CCWIS. So again, talk over the specifics with your federal analysts, but there have been some creative ways of using CCWIS funding to support data quality needs. All right, let's close out the poll and go to the next slide, please. All right, so Teresa, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thank you. So we did take a shot at some questions that are frequently asked. Some of these have been on prior webinars, or they're in the policy manual Q&A. So we won't spend a ton of time going over them, since it seems like we have some Q&A still from the group. But you know, the first one has to do, you know, with when you need to submit a data quality plan. Again, you know, it's a year, you know, basically from when you declare, and then you do an annual update every year, you know, in your APDs. And the biennial review is, you know, every 2 years. Can existing data quality plans or continuous quality improvement efforts meet the requirements for the CCWIS biennial review? You know, I think, as Alex mentioned, we've been emphasizing, you know, the need for how the CCWIS plan is integrated in the overall agency's CQI efforts and data quality efforts. We have had some states who just want to hand us the CQI plan, and, you know, it doesn't really meet the CCWIS requirements. You know, we do want to see integration of efforts and collaboration, but if you just turn in a plan and it's a CQI plan and it really doesn't address, you know, timeliness, accuracy, and completeness, or duplication in your system or automation in your system, you know, it's not going to meet those CCWIS requirements. Next slide, please. Okay, we've seen some concern, you know, especially from states who have legacy systems, but they're also trying to build new systems. And, you know, questions to us around, you know, how much resources and energy, you know, do they want to devote in their data quality plan to those legacy systems that are going to be obsolete. And so, you know, most of the time, again, we've talked about there's good lessons learned, there are pain points, you know, in a legacy system, and there should be really a focus on conversion. And, you know, most of the states have to do that work anyway. But having standards, you know, that relate to data conversion, you know, for that legacy system is a logical focus, you know, for legacy systems when you're building a new system. The next question, you know, do we have to do 2 data quality plans if we have a legacy system and a new system? The answer, you know, you can combine them, but you have to address all the requirements for both systems. So in essence, you know, you do have to to meet the requirements for both systems until the new system, is obsolete. I mean, I'm sorry, the legacy system is obsolete. Next slide, please. Okay, so we just wanted to wrap things up. These themes you've heard repeatedly from us, and we appreciate, the efforts that you make to improve data quality and to help us achieve some of these goals. We've talked a lot about data quality being a team effort, that data quality is an ongoing process, that involves increasing capacity. We would like to see more detail, with specific plans and timeframes for your expected outcomes in your plans. And we would like to see plans that reflect the priorities of your organization or the issues, that your agency is focusing on or that are important to the program area. And again, we want to make sure that you have concrete plans and that your biennial review process is meaningful to you. That it's helpful to you and really understanding is the data quality strategies that you have working, and are there levels of automation that need to be improved or modified to help you go further or achieve better results. Next slide, please. Okay, so it's 2:45. Do we go till 3? Is that so I guess we have a little bit of time for additional questions.
Okay. Yeah, we have 6 more on the Q&A list. First one here. Can you provide specific examples from submitted data quality plans for methods/documentation that does satisfy what you're looking for in each of these areas? Would be very helpful to provide in an FAQ or similar type of documentation.
I think, to be honest, most states have gotten conditions with their data quality plans. So we haven't had one really where all the requirements, have been met, or, there's been iterative efforts to get the data quality plans approved. And as I stated, at the beginning of the webinar, is that we're really trying to build capacity. So to be quite honest, Children's Bureau has really been trying to acknowledge that this is new for states, and also, with the pandemic, that states are really struggling, with resources and, implementation issues. So we've been pretty lenient, if you will, on the plans so far. So most of them are really not kind of where they need to be, which I think we've talked a little bit about today. But we did put forth those examples in the presentation of, what is optimal and what is unacceptable. So hopefully those examples are helpful to you, and we will certainly be looking to develop more of those kinds of examples for you. And as we see good practice, and we are seeing improvements, so that's the good news. I mean, we are seeing improvements in the last 2 years. So as we see those, we'll work with states to see what we can share. And we're always open, to have states participate in these presentations. We don't like always having to come to you. We know you have limited resources, but if, there are states who are doing some innovative things where data quality has, made a difference, in your agency, or you've done some automation that you think would be of value of interest, let us know, and we would love to have states, again, be able to share some of that. So we'll keep looking, but we don't have ready examples today.
So the next question also gets into some examples. So I think it is a little bit duplicative. So I'm going to skip that question. The next one, could you please explain the relationship between data quality program, and the CWIS system implementation. You mentioned about creating schedules for the data quality activities and including them in the data quality plan. Will there be any overlapping between the data quality schedule and the system implementation schedule? Uh, is the data quality program an ongoing activity even after the system implementation is complete?
Okay, so the later part of that question is easier to answer maybe than the first. Yes, it's an ongoing requirement. The data quality plan and your ongoing efforts is required for your updates when your system is operational, also when it is in development. So it is an ongoing CWIS requirement. There are probably hundreds of ways, really, that states could demonstrate a good collaboration, if you will, or integration between the program area and the automation, and the CWIS plans. And as the person who wrote that question, I can't see the questions, but they noted, sort of, well, if you're in kind of in development, and you're busily, trying to get your system developed, what makes sense in terms of program involvement and program priority. And, you have freedom, to think about that and to think about what makes the most sense for your organization. From our standpoint, I probably, one of the most important things is to make sure that the project team that is building the new system, that there are resources who really understand what the data quality requirements are and the needs are and where the gaps are, in that legacy system. So for example, if you have individuals, and most of you do, but, people, I understand resources are tight, but, you really have to make sure there's folks who understand the federal reporting requirements to the greatest extent possible in your teams, that are developing the system requirements. And traditionally, what some of your pain points have been in terms of the system being able to give you the data that you need for federal reports. But like we've talked about, more importantly, that from the data federal reports is what you need, in order to run your business or to improve your practice. So again, if we see PIPs where there are, data is not available, or, 5-year plans, or, annual CFSP plans where there's large sections where there's no data, available, or, there are reviews and audits where no one uses the data. People have data, but no one uses it. Those are kind of, red flags to us that there really isn't enough integration between what's happening, with the system development or the system enhancements and the program areas, that are responsible for implementing the program. I hope that helped. Alex, do you have anything you want to add?
No, ma'am.
The next question here, can you provide examples of states or agencies that are engaged in high quality efforts to publicize and share data quality efforts?
I can think of some examples, but that might be a discussion or maybe a question for us to follow up on. There are states, again, like I said, who have websites who do ongoing activities, throughout the year around data quality. And so, we probably need to maybe follow up and share some of those examples with states' permission, but I don't want to kind of just do that off the fly.
Okay. The next question here, when you say agency-wide, you mean program-wide, as in child welfare program, correct? Our state HHS agency is working on its own agency-wide version of data governance. You're not trying to mix them within the child welfare requirements lens, correct? Obviously, an agency-wide approach is valuable. But that agency effort is driven by multiple federal programs as well as a vast set of local stakeholders.
Yeah, I think our main focus really for CWIS is child welfare program. However, I think one of the innovations that we talked about is a lot of the, not a lot, but, states are building enterprise systems. And so the systems are not as siloed, as they used to be. And so many states, well, not many, but even if the state isn't developing a enterprise system where the other health and human services systems, are on a shared platform, states are interested, in having data in data warehouses, because child welfare doesn't really operate in a vacuum, in terms of the data. So it really depends on the organization itself and their approach. There are states who do have centralized data quality at the state level, where there are data quality officers at the state level, and so the CWIS requirements are impacted, by the state organization or the state approach. But in terms of CWIS, yeah, we're talking about, in terms of the CWIS regulation, a child welfare program.
Okay, our next question is a little lengthy, so I'm going to skip over that one real quick to get to, there's a couple shorter ones here because we're short on time. Should a data quality plan start with issues identification and prioritization?
I think it is a good place to start. I mean, so most of them start with governance, which is a logical place to start also, because again, it's the umbrella, it's the structure, of what your plan is going to be. But in terms of, what process you've used to prioritize, what your focus is on, or what your improvement efforts are on, or what automation issues you have, or the automation strategies you want to take, yes, it would make sense to sort of do an assessment of what those priorities are, and to make sure that the plan reflects the most important.
Next question. Even if a single data quality plan hasn't been completely approved, can you share pieces of various plans that are in good shape?
I think we will work on it. I think we kind of already answered some of that. And again, we're trying to build capacity. So that was the point of this webinar, really was to provide a vision, for what optimal really looks like in some of these areas, and also to help you and help us, sort of identify what should we focus on. The regulation itself is, as we said, really comprehensive, and you can get overwhelmed, trying to focus on everything. So we highlighted those 5 areas kind of where we see the most areas where we need to grow, and that was Alex's kind of part of the presentation on the areas that we want to focus on. So we will be looking for examples, and, again, we will look for an opportunity, to be able to share some of those.
Okay, next question here. Is there a sample plan / preferred format that newbies can reference?
I think probably in the technical bulletin, that's probably as close as you're going to get, to a template. One of the dangers, we've talked about, and honestly, some of what we've seen with that is the, initial data quality plans are sort of parroting back the regulation to us, or they're parroting back, the sections that are highlighted in that technical bulletin 6, but they're not operationalized for the agency itself or for the system, the specific CWIS system. And that again is where we see areas for growth, but there is a basic outline, that was in this presentation, and an outline that is in technical bulletin 6.
And Teresa, if I may add, if you direct yourselves, once you get a copy of this, to slide number 10, we do have some high-level bullet items that states have reported to us they found useful in developing their initial plan. So to the person who asked that question or anyone else, combined with what is at the end of the technical bulletin with this slide, and also the previous webinar we did January or February 2019, I think it was, may be of interest to you if you're developing your first plan.
And the other thing I was thinking about, I think you mentioned it, Alex, but I'm not sure if we did or not. And, you know, we talked about you letting us know what would be helpful to you for technical guidance. So these suggestions are great, you know, that you're making and that you want to see some good examples. But also, you know, the other thing that we would offer is, you know, in your interim period, you know, between when your APD is due, you know, reach out to us, ask for technical assistance, ask to review what you're working on, you know, when it's in draft form, you know, spend one of your regular calls, ask your analyst, can we focus on, you know, data quality? And, you know, if they've got other things going on or they want to pull in other resources, you know, we want to try to do that, you know, to help before your biennial review or before your plans are due. And, you know, again, maybe folks have some other ideas about technical assistance we can do that would be helpful.
Okay, we do have one final question, but I believe we've hit time, so we'll probably have to answer this one offline.
Okay, well, the questions were great. We really appreciate the interest in this topic and the participation. So we will be looking at your feedback, going back over the questions that you gave us. And if you think of things, you know, after this webinar is over or when you're doing your regular work, please feel free to reach out to us. And we appreciate your time today. Have a good afternoon.